Welcome back, everyone, to the Sales Show. I asked Zoltan Vardy to be here because founders need help in sales. We always need help in sales, but particularly right now, it's tough on all fronts. There is AI on the one side, there's the cautious buyer on the other side. So I asked Zoltan to be here. He's generated over 2 billion in sales in a 30 years career in B2B sales. And he launched his framework, the launch code sales framework that I hope he can share with us. So welcome, Zoltan.
Yes, Simon, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on your show, and I'm looking forward to chatting about something I've been working on for intensely for the last 6 years, which is helping founders to close more deals and to scale faster through some basic principles of founder-led sales.
Yes. Let's start with prospecting. It's the most boring thing, but also the most important thing to do. We try to do it on a daily basis. What's your prospecting ritual? Do you have one that works, or have you seen things that work right now?
Well, look, prospecting is in my mind a part of a process which actually begins with understanding who you're selling to and what you're selling, right? So prospecting to the wrong customer with the wrong message is an exercise in futility. So, what I believe you have to get right at the very beginning is to have a very, very clear idea of what problem you solve, who you solve it for, and why you solve it better or different than anybody else. If you've managed to capture that in a clear and compelling way, and then you need to communicate that in a way that gets people excited. Typical situation I find is that and I don't know how many inbound direct messages you get in a day, Simon. I must get 30 to 50. It's always, I'd say a low overwhelming majority are basically about this is what we do, this is how we do it. And as I like to say, nobody cares who you are or what you do until they first understand what problem you solve for them. And so, leading with that understanding of the problem, leading with an understanding of what typically companies in your customer space face, and then talking about how you solve that problem is probably the best way to start with prospecting, even before you get into some of the technical questions.
Totally. Do you reserve a specific time per day to do that? How do you do it?
Well, if I go back to sort of when I started my business 5, 6 years ago, I probably did a lot more outbound than I do now. So, I was in that motion of identifying, my target audience on LinkedIn, then initiating, some sort of connection request, and then following up with some combination of value, content, things that I thought would be relevant for them, and then slowly probing to understand their problem, and then solving, offering some sort of solution to that. So I did that, probably an hour or two a day at the start. The nice thing is once you do that enough and you start building your business, then, and do a good job of creating a footprint in the social media space, in the digital space about, who you are and who you've helped, then a lot of, prospects will find you. And I actually find myself doing that more now, is managing inbound leads. And that I do that in a very efficient way. I think I read somewhere that something like 70% of deals are closed by the first supplier or service provider who responds to the inbound inquiry. So I'm very, very efficient in that way, and making sure that I get back to somebody almost immediately if they've reached out to me, and then to initiate that discovery call, and then ultimately hopefully arriving at an agreement.
That's true. I think it's underestimated how important it is, the speed of our answer to inbound requests. Right? Some people,
Yeah,
they wait for two
yeah.
days.
Yeah. And if I can go on my soapbox for a moment, I think one of the things I've realized in the last few years is somehow this incredible explosion in digital communication has led to people forgetting the value of just treating others with some minimum level of respect, which means getting back to them, to their emails, responding to their DMs, returning the phone calls, things like that, which I think you and I probably learned when we first started in this business, are basic and fundamental requirements now, are almost a point of difference if you do that. So I think that's something that comes with experience, but also it is an incredibly important part of the sales process, is just getting people to feel like you're taking them seriously and that you're responding to their needs.
And sometimes it's tough. For example, on LinkedIn, I find myself not seeing some messages because they're buried in, as you say, 60 noise messages, and the signal is sometimes buried.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. Well, then comes the next part, right? Follow up. So making sure that you're following up with the prospects that you want to do business with, making sure that there is a regular, motion that you're following in. And look, as you well know, the sales is also about hearing no a lot, right? So there's a lot of effort that you put into follow up and engagement that doesn't lead to anything because, for whatever reason that individual is not currently open to listening to what you have to say, but then you just have to brush yourself off and move on.
If somebody is on your dream 100 list or dream
Hmm.
client list, how long do you inform them? How long do you prospect before you give up?
Yeah. Well, I would say I start by first identifying if there is some commonality that I can tap into to begin that engagement or that discussion, right? So, one of the most important elements of sales is trust, right? And how do you build trust? You can obviously build trust over time by being responsive and being, doing what you say you're going to do and delivering, on all your agreements. But the way that you build trust from the very beginning is by trying to find some point of connection. Obviously, if there's a common network, common interest or individual who can introduce you. If you happen to have participated in an event where that person was, then that's also a common point of interest. So finding that common point of interest will get you in their sort of zone of openness. And that's when you initially will reach out and say, hey, I was speaking to such and such, and they recommend I get in touch, or hey, I saw you speak at this and this conference. We should have a chat, is already a great place to start. If for whatever reason I don't have that connection, then it goes back to what I originally spoke about, which is that you have to really, really, really pinpoint the challenge or the problem that likely customer will have, and then to really focus on how are you going to address that in a very efficient way and get them to listen.
I'm thinking, how would I see if we have people in common? Do you check LinkedIn or do you have a
Yeah, so
better?
LinkedIn would be the first place I would check. That's the most obvious place. I also think that you can actually develop a network of people who you can reach out to and say, I'm looking for somebody who is a decision maker at H&M, just to use a random example. Could you maybe look at your network and see if there's somebody there that you can introduce me to. So I think LinkedIn certainly is the first go-to place. And then it's a matter of doing a bit of digging. A lot of great ways to engage with people are at events. I'm a very big fan of events. You can go to a conference, you can go to a business event, and find yourself in a room of 100, sometimes thousands of people who are there for one specific purpose, which is to build business relationships. And it's like it's a fertile ground for engaging conversations. And so, looking for events where you can engage with your target customer in person is a massive opportunity. And it's something I think that a lot of founders probably don't spend enough time on doing because, again, we live in a very, very digital first world these days.
It might become a premium soon to be at events with people.
Oh, I'm 100% certain. And I think you mentioned AI at the start. I think actually personal relationships, if anything, or just engaging with somebody on a personal one-to-one level is increasingly getting more and more valuable. It's so easy to get lost in this insane number of messages and digital, you know, uh, platforms and everything that's going out there, just bombarding you with these messages that just having somebody pick up the phone and say hi, or having a conversation with somebody at an event, it just becomes a much more meaningful start to a relationship. And so I really, really believe that that's going to be something that will become increasingly more and more valuable over time.
You have spent now time elaborating your framework. Can you share that with us?
Mhm. Sure. So I think to understand my framework, you have to understand where the genesis of the whole project or product. So, I spent 20 years in the corporate world. I was a senior executive in the media industry. At one point, I was CEO of about 1,000-person broadcasting group in Central Europe, owned by ProSiebenSat.1, a company I'm sure you'll be familiar with. I then was head of global ad sales for NBC Universal. So I was in sort of big corporate roles, selling very, very, high ticket, um, products and services to corporate customers. And after about 20 years, I decided to shift and pivot from my own career, and I started, on a whim almost engaging with founders through various mentoring programs, accelerated programs. And one of the interesting insights that I got early on is that I was meeting all of these really, really passionate, um, technology driven people, individuals who just really, really love their product, but they had no idea of how they were going to turn it into a business. And as I got to engaging with these founders in these conversations, whether it was through mentoring sessions or workshops or whatever, I realized that they were just missing some of the most fundamental elements of a successful sales and marketing strategy that frankly were second nature to me. And so, literally on a average Tuesday afternoon, I took out a white piece of paper and I took out a pen and I started, kind of sketching out, like, if I was teaching somebody sales basics from the ground up, like what would that look like? And I said, okay, well, typically, what are the problems I'm coming across? Well, first problem is these guys are trying to sell everything to everybody, right? There's no such thing, right? You can't sell if you're everything to everybody, then you're nothing to nobody. And so first, thing is, how do you focus your offer or message so that your prospects understand why they should buy what you're selling? That's kind of the first pillar that I created. And then the second situation I found is, okay, so they might have something to say, but they have no idea how they're going to go about engaging with potential customers. And there's typically two strategies here. These might be familiar to you as well. One is the I know a guy strategy, right? Which is basically when you look around your immediate network and you kind of find somebody who happens to somehow possibly be interested in what you have to say, and then you kind of have a conversation with them. That's fine, but that's not particularly scalable. Then there's the spray and pray approach, right? You send out 10,000 emails and pray that somebody responds. And what I found is that just taking a step back and say, okay, who's my ideal customer? Here are 50 companies that meet those criteria. Let me go out and find who the decision maker is. Let me start the engaging process through direct sales, through outbound sales, and then kind of build, channels through inbound marketing and partnerships. So that was kind of the second pillar. Structure your client acquisition so you can close more deals with less effort. And then the third problem that I found was that once some of those founders had gotten to the stage where they had a focused offer message, they had a structured approach to client acquisition, they needed somehow to be able to scale their operations, right? And that's the third pillar, which is scale your operations to so you can focus on strategy and build a successful team. And so there it was really about creating a clear idea of what good looks like, tracking the excuse me, tracking the performance of your sales activities, and then ultimately building a team that will be able to execute on that strategy. And so that focus, structure, scale, is at the foundation of the launch code, and is basically what what I teach to founders through personal mentoring, through workshops, and through cohort programs.
And it's meant to go from the very beginning, but it's also helpful for people who are in the middle of something. What are you currently, when you teach this, what are currently the big bottlenecks that you hear, the big problems they need to solve?
Well, I think it's some version of the three things I talked about. So, problem number one is they will begin to communicate their value proposition in a way that people just don't understand, right? I don't know if you've had this experience, like, you go to a conference or an event, and you're having your chit chat, and you say, so tell me what your company does. And then they'll launch into this 5-minute monologue
And you
with
still don't
bits
know
and
what they're
bytes and
doing. Yeah.
buzzwords, and just going on and on. And in the meantime, in your head, you're like thinking, I have no idea what this guy is talking about. And then you politely, wish them luck and move on. And like that type of conversation is happening in the minds of your prospects every day, in every way that they engage with whatever it is you're selling. When they go to your website, when they get an email from you, maybe you get to a discovery call, like in all of those situations, you have got to be able to state in no without any uncertainty, who is it you're helping, and how are you helping them? And so that the process of simplifying it, of getting down to the essence, of making your value proposition is so crystal clear that even an intelligent 12-year-old understands it. That I think is probably the single biggest challenge that a lot of founders, even at a later stage, will have. Because what happens is, you'll start adding features, you'll start adding all sorts of elements to your business, and it dilutes your message. And after a while, you become very, very vanilla. So that I think is probably the one that I spend most time helping founders do. And then the second portion is certainly much more technical in nature. You started, one of your questions was how do you do prospecting? I mean, again, there's a million different methods to do that. There's different methodologies for that. But there are elements within the sales process, like how do you handle objections? How do you anticipate objections and then craft answers that you can then use on an ongoing basis to typical, questions that your prospects have. There's a whole process for that. How do you manage a discovery call? How do you get to clarity on whether this prospect is a real prospect or somebody who's just, as they call it, a tire kicker. So somebody who's just kind of looking around and not necessarily in buying mode. These are all typical, prospect based, I should say sales based technical elements. And then the third piece, which I'm sure you've come across in your client base as well, is once a founder gets to a stage where they have, understood the process of selling, inevitably they want to hire somebody to do it for them, right? So there's this transition period, and without fail, they always hire the wrong person to start. Um, they end up hiring somebody who, based on their CV and the logos on their business card, not necessarily on their fit for a company at their stage of development. And there's a big difference there. So these kind of things, a lack of focus, kind of some technical elements that need to be fixed, and then finally, hiring the right team. Those are kind of the three typical challenges that I think most of the clients I work with face.
I did this myself. One of my first salespeople that I hired, they actually pitched me. They said, Simon, I scaled Uber Eats in North America. I want to do this with your company. And I said, come in. That's my love language. Come in. And what I later understood is, oh my God, when you are in one of these big logos organizations, you sit in meetings all the time. They don't really know how to sell a single product that's just beginning.
Yeah. And what happens is they tend to underestimate the value of the logo to get them started in the process, right?
Yeah.
Now, Uber is obviously now a global company and a massive brand. At some stage Uber was just an idea, and they were getting meetings just on the back of Travis, the founders, charisma and personality. But there's a point at which you just get, you get callbacks because you're from a company that people have heard of. That's certainly not the case when you're building a startup, right? Generally you're unknown. And so just having that clarity of message, having that persistence to move forward despite setbacks, those are all qualities that a lot of people who have built their careers purely in a corporate environment just simply don't, they're muscles they don't train. And so I'll be honest with you, I was always a bit of an oddball in my corporate career because I was always the type of guy who was pushing the envelope in terms of moving things forward and focusing on execution. And sometimes it got me in a bit of trouble as well. So once I started working with entrepreneurs, I'm like, hey, I get you.
That's
That's
my
kind of how I am.
people. Yeah.
Exactly. I always like to say, if I think about how many times I had meetings in London to discuss what we're going to discuss in the meeting, I'd be a rich man.
Yeah. This is maybe if you're listening and you are in a corporate role and you have heard more than 3 times, you are pushing us so much, maybe you are an entrepreneur
Yes, yes, in disguise, right?
in disguise.
Exactly. But look, to be also fair, because I think there's another side of the story. Like I have found that the entrepreneurs I work with who at least spent a couple of years in not necessarily a corporate environment, but a kind of a more structured business environment are much more open to understanding the value of a structured approach to building a business, right? Because they have understood that yes, you have to build a bit of consensus, and yes, there is some process that does lead to better outcomes. I think it gets to be a point of diminishing returns after you've been in the corporation world for decades, and then you try to kind of build something from scratch. Then it's more of a personality type of that is successful in that. But the founders who've never worked in any structured environment and started their first business when they're 18, I think oftentimes are capable of taking a company from 0 to 1, but are very unprepared to take a company from 1 to 100.
Yes. You learn the value of checklists, of documenting processes when you are in a proper organization, and you will need it so much when you start your
Absolutely.
own.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's such a tough balance, right? I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this in building your own business. It's like you've got to be very, very execution focused and getting things done, and there's an intuition to it, right? Like it's just like, okay, I don't know for sure if it's 100% right, but it's close enough. Let's test, right? You kind of go out there and you put your thoughts to the test. But there is a point at which what got you to a certain level of development is not the same that is going to get you to the next level of development. Like it's a classic scaling dilemma, right? And I think that's where I think the founders who recognize that complexity increases exponentially as you grow, that communication misalignments can really, really hold you back, that decision making slows if you've got to be the person responsible for every decision. Like these are all typical challenges that companies in their scaling phase face. And that's when founders who recognize this and start building some element of structure are going to be successful, and certainly more successful than those who kind of stick to the very core entrepreneurial traits that have made them successful to that point.
This is so important. And I got a lot of pushback over the last 20 years because I came from a global strategy advisory. And when I
Yeah.
started my own thing, each meeting was as if we were a department's meeting. So on Monday we would have a strategy meeting, even if just me and my assistant. But we would have
Hmm.
a strategy meeting on Monday, and on Friday a review of the numbers of the core key KPIs. And
Yeah.
some clients say, "But Simon, we're just three people. We don't need a KPI dashboard every week." And I said, "Okay, well, okay, keep doing what you're doing, but at some point you will want to have that." And now it's true that we don't scale necessarily with people anymore. You can scale with AI. But guess what the AI needs to actually be of service, to be a collaborator? They need access to your processes, to who you are, to who you are here to serve, to what you can do for them, and to how you do things. So those exact processes, if you don't have them written, you can scale with people and you can scale with AI.
Yeah. 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 And I think somehow, getting founders to understand that shift is probably one of the biggest challenges. But if you get it right, it's quite amazing. So one of the companies I work with early on, a company called Dexery, they're out of the UK. They're a management warehouse platform. They use robots to scan, huge warehouses and create a digital twin of the warehouse management inventory. When I started working with them, there were eight of them. There's about 100,000 pounds of revenue. We applied the principles that I just talked about, the launch code, the focus, structure, and scale principles. They closed their first £1 million of revenue based on those principles, and now they're at 20 million pounds of revenue. They're about 160 people. They've raised almost $300 million of investment, so they've really, really scaled fast. And I think one of the great things about that company's evolution is that the founders um, recognized the importance of changing their roles within that process, right? There was a point at which they had to hire a finance manager, they had to hire a sales lead, they had to hire a marketing team, and so on and so forth. And and the great thing about it is I talked to the founder Andre Danescu quite regularly, and he said, like, I'm still in founder mode, right? Like the guy still is passionate about everything, and he's very much involved in the company, but he doesn't feel like he's got to make every decision and be there for everything, right? So that you can still be engaged, you can be passionate about the business, but you don't have to be involved in everything. And I think their ability to scale is really much a function of his ability and his co-founder's ability to make that adjustment in their mind.
Totally, totally. And it will help you. Also, there might be a stage where you come back to the operations. I saw Toby Lütke, CEO of Shopify. The
Hmm.
last 5 days he spent in his GitHub repo. He wasn't developing anymore, but he
Hmm.
came back and is developing now because he's so passionate about all these developments in AI that he wants to be in the forefront, speak the language of his developers, of everybody. And
Hmm.
and and he's enjoying this open source moment. And I've seen many people who are not technical now going vibe code so that they are, synced with what's going on, and they understand easily what will actually be disrupted and what will not. What's your
Yeah.
take on AI?
Look, my take on AI is it's right now it's the loudest voice in the room, right? It's impossible to ignore. And as a result, I think there's a feeling of like it being um so much involved in every single element of our lives that it also tends to be overvalued in terms of the impact it can have. And I'm not here to tell you that, AI is a fad. It's a sea change. To ignore it would be absolutely foolish. I mean, the technology is powerful, it's transformative, it's here to stay. But it's also created a dangerous illusion. It's made founders who maybe fear or avoid sales believe that somehow AI can spare them from what I call the pain of sales, right? Like that process
Mm.
of going out, engaging with customers, understanding their problems, iterating your value proposition, and so on and so forth. And they believe that like one of the 400 plus AI sales tools that's launched in the past 2 years is going to magically fix everything that's broken in their sales strategy. I like to say, if selling was only that easy, right? I mean, the uncomfortable truth is that the fundamentals of sales matter more than the tool you use to apply them, right? So if your sales strategy is broken, if you're selling a weak solution to the wrong audience through the wrong channel, AI is not going to fix it. It's just going to help you fail faster. So what you need to do is to get the fundamentals of your sales strategy clear, and you can use AI to accelerate your ability to implement that strategy and to test what works and what doesn't. But it doesn't release you from the responsibility that a founder has, which is to understand their customer and understand how they sell their product or solution to customers, because that's what ultimately is going to drive the business forward.
Totally. Totally. If we don't have the fundamentals of sales in place, who we are here to serve, how we are serving them, how we can help them be ready for what's coming, all the
Right.
acceleration is just acceleration.
Yeah.
Um, and then and also on the other side, processes are here to stay, like the prospecting process, the cadence of following up in sales, the
Yeah.
cadence of nurturing, expanding after landing, referrals when we have a trusted long-term relationship. These processes will stay with us all the time, and we
Yeah.
click tools in and out of those, and that rate of change is super high right now. Every week there is a new tool, but the
Yeah.
process is still the same, right? Starting
I
a
know.
conversation, continuing the conversation, creating value, expanding value, that process will stay the same.
Yeah. And you mentioned that every week there's a new tool. I mean, literally there's a new tool, and
Literally.
I mean, I think I think that the challenge is if you're not literally living in that every day, it is just sense of overwhelm, right? Like, and what happens when you're overwhelmed with information, you tend to actually just freeze and not do anything, right? So I think that the important thing is, and what I always tell my founders is, look, AI, I think, is going to be good for three things. The first is it's great for lead identification and analysis, right? So identifying the companies that are most likely to be relevant for you, it creates a lot of efficient ways to gather data, to build lists. Like that's, I think, really useful and something that you could do, you were doing manually before. I think it's great for understanding consumer insights. Like at this stage, there's no excuse for you to sit down with a prospect without having a really clear understanding of their business. Like that age-old question of, so tell me what your business does is now quite out of place, because you should understand what that customer's business does, just by sitting in front of ChatGPT for 20 minutes and getting a deep dive into that. And the third thing, which I think it's really good for, is engaging, right? Like content and messaging, fine tuning your messaging, making more subject lines better, creating a little bit of a cadence to your outreach. All those things are good, but what it does not replace is you understanding your business. And and what I always say is, if you're going to introduce AI, start small and scale smart. So test one AI in the process. It could be lead scoring, it could be email automation, and then see how it works, fine tune it, and then add another layer. But this concept of like, I need 17 AI tools to be efficient in sales, I think is just overwhelming and quite frankly not successful.
Zoltan Vardy, everyone, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find you, your book?
Right. So, I think I'm still to this day the only Zoltan Vardy on LinkedIn. So if you can find me there, then I'm happy to connect with you. The other thing I would offer, just as an offer for your audience, is if somebody wants to get a little bit of a better understanding of what like creating a clear value proposition looks like, which is, I think, is one of the most fundamental elements of sales, they can just go to my website, so zoltanvardy.com/podcast, and then they'll get a free video guide that will take them through a 5-step process I created to create a single sentence that explains what problem you solve, who you solve it for, and why it's a better choice than any other in the market. And that in itself will already get them down the path towards becoming more efficient in sales, and maybe even down the path of working with me someday.
zoltanvardy.com/podcast. Thank you
Yeah,
so
forward
much.
slash. Yeah.
/podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Zoltan, for being on the show, and keep rolling.
Thank you very much, Simon. It was a pleasure.